This is my review for the movie Only Feet. Yes, Only Feet. So, the movie Only Feet came out in 2025 and was directed by Walter Wright. No, not Walter White, but Walter Wright. Yes, he is the right person for this film, right? Right, not right. Anyway, so I was contacted directly by Walter himself asking if I would be interested in seeing his film, and I said yes. So my mentality, honestly, was something along the lines of that like popular Johnny Bravo quote. I'll show a screenshot here on screen where he says, I'm sickened but curious. Because that's pretty much what I was. I was not necessarily sickened, but I knew that this was definitely going to be different from any sort of normal film, and I was, of course, curious about it. So, the basic plot to the movie is that a couple who seem to be living in a hotel room is close to being kicked out and they're short for cash. And the boyfriend, who I believe his name was Jace, I'm not gonna lie, I know I kind of have like hearing problems, so I couldn't tell if it was Jace or Chase, but I'm pretty sure it was Jace. Either way, the boyfriend decides to sell pictures of his feet online as fetish content. Fetish. Fetish. So, of course, this makes them a lot of money really fast, but Jace doesn't tell his girlfriend how he's making the money. He has a suitor that will constantly like demand for more ridiculous things, and eventually he blocks the person and they turn out to be or turn into more like they turn out to be a stalker. The stalker actually ends up being a man and not a woman, as this person originally portrayed themselves as. And eventually they kidnap Jace's girlfriend. So Jace tries to get his girlfriend back, but ends up being kidnapped himself, basically. And in the end, he has to escape the stalker and his cohort minion dude. I don't want to spoil the movie entirely because it has yet to be released on multiple platforms as I record this. So I found the movie to be hilarious and but in many ways actually oddly truthful. To me, I feel like using a male lead helps the viewer get comfortable with the idea of someone selling pictures of themselves for money. It's actually a thing, believe it or not, that people are into feet, of course, and other things, and they'll pay for it, pay for pictures of it and more. In fact, actually, one of the biggest jokes you find on the internet is about foot fetish content. Typically, people think of women getting into this type of service and selling pictures of themselves, and I'll admit that I was among the people that would believe that. I thought the main character to the movie was originally going to be the girlfriend, not the boyfriend. And it surprised me, but I was pleasantly surprised. I wondered if this was partially done to not have the movie become super dark. Having the main character as a male instead of a female makes it a lot more funny, I'll admit. If you were to flip the roles, the movie actually becomes a lot more scary when you think of a stalker demanding more and more crazy pictures and then stalking the person afterwards, in real life. I found that the humor in this film was a great way to soften this reality. Male or female, this actually does happen to people in real life, fetish content or not. I've had people stalk me online in the past, actually, and one of them even called my phone once. Yep. I found, so for me, it was kind of like, yeah, things like that, those little nuances are kind of why I was like, what, I actually, as silly as the movie could be, I actually liked it because it's like, this is real stuff that happens. It's funny here, it's funny but they're actually talking about real things. So I found the movie to be clever, actually, for incorporating humor into something that actually happens to people. I think that in some ways this movie would open up the eyes to people who aren't familiar with these concepts. I think that it brings up things that are true, but in a silly way and in ways that won't scare the viewer. Sometimes people are afraid to talk about heavy concepts in general, whether it's about, death or, the underworld, darker side, things of life and drugs and stuff like that. Uh, and sometimes people are afraid to talk about these things simply because of the fact that they're presented in frightening ways. I relate this to like true crime content too, which there is a true crime element to this movie, honestly, and how, for example, if you've watched videos I've made in the past about serial killers or missing people and stuff like that, uh, I've had people tell me, this is such a terrible thing to have happened, but, I really appreciate you just being in a calm, even tone talking about it because it makes it a lot less scary, a lot easier to digest. And so that's my point with this movie, and that I appreciate the director's way of creating it, and that it's tongue in cheek, but it gives people the nuance to real subject matters, to things that actually happen in real life. We could finally at least bring it up, even if it's in a joking way. These things do happen to people. The movie is shot in black and white. I guess technically it wasn't filmed in black and white, but it's shown in black and white. And I actually did like this with the style of the film because it gave it a very sleek look. Even though, of course, it came out in 2025, and the director had told me it took 3 years to make. So, it's a modern film, as of course, as I record this, it's a modern film, and typically everything is automatically in color. So to see something in black and white, it's like, okay, that's different. I think in general, no matter if it's a movie or a drawing or whatever, a lot of people seem to think of black and white, in photos especially, black and white photos, for example, as being very sleek, classy, and kind of like that. And it's just funny to me that the movie itself is like, okay, we're really silly, but there is this artistic element to the way it's filmed, and I do appreciate that. So the ending of the film I found to be hilarious. uh, I was wondering, am I a bad person for laughing because they ended up, small spoiler here, shaving the main character's head. And I thought that was hilarious because it was done and he got the worst shave of his life, basically. I don't want to spoil the entire movie, but the ending was just something that I would imagine Tommy Wiseau making for one of his films. While watching the movie, I also wondered if some of the dialogue was improvised. And I'm not saying this in a bad way, I'm just genuinely curious. I couldn't help but wonder this, and because some of the way that the multiple actors would be talking throughout the film, it was kind of like, it reminded me of something from Whose Line Is It? Whose Line Is It Anyway? If you're familiar with that show, which I loved watching Whose Line growing up. I guess my only negative contention is that the film is about foot fetish pictures, yet there aren't that many instances of the pictures being taken. There's actually more sex scenes than foot scenes, I swear. And I can't believe I'm saying this, but there's not enough feet in the film. But I guess that's a good thing because because we know that this isn't a thinly disguised fetish film. It's a fetish film, just not a thinly disguised one. Overall, though, I found that the movie was ridiculous and over the top, but in the same line as other movies such as Hood of Horror or Blank Man. And another example that came to mind was this other movie. I'm pretty sure I reviewed it on here in the past, called The Video Dead, which was from 1987. And I'll never forget that movie and how they had the one dog and it was named Chocolate. It was so stupid. But that movie, though, despite how silly that movie was, it was cheesy in its own ways. It also had that movie had great makeup, actually great film shots, and the idea itself, the plot to the movie was an interesting concept that they at least tried to explore. That movie was cheesy, and I still literally think about it to this day. Not even this because of the movie. I just sometimes you'll watch certain movies, whether they're good or bad, and you'll just think about it. And I think that's what's most important. It doesn't have to be this 5 out of 5 star, 10 out of 10 amazing masterpiece of a movie, because, first of all, I don't think movies like that even exist. But on top of that, to me, I think if somebody thinks about your movie years after watching it, I think that's the real success there, to me. To me. But anyway, Only Feet to me is something that I will definitely be thinking about for years to come, which is a success in its own way, I would say. I find the movie not just because it's funny, but I think it's true in many ways with the things that it touches on. And I really enjoyed the movie because, in some ways, it was kind of on that same note of how George Carlin would present his comedy. Now, not necessarily as salty and, brusque as Carlin would be, but Only Feet was funny to me like Carlin was because he was talking about and pointing out the truth. And that's one thing that many people in general like about, for example, comedians, the fact that they have observational humor, really. So I think that a lot of people get caught up in trying to make masterpieces within film, yet ironically, they end up creating something boring instead. What seems to be so easily forgotten is that the audience wants to be entertained. Personally, I have no interest in movies like Avatar and Titanic. I've never been like a James Cameron person. In fact, despite all the movies that I've reviewed this year in 2026, I don't consider myself to be a movie person. And not that I don't like watching movies in a sense, I don't like watching good movies. I'll admit it flat out. I'm not the type of person that's like, I just, I don't care about Johnny Depp. I don't care about Tom Hanks. I'm not into that super popular stuff. That's not what I'm here for. I want the, I, w- I want the stuff that is homebrew. And that's what this movie is. I love homebrew, down to earth stuff, and that's what I find Only Feet to be. It's very homebrew and down to earth. There are a lot of films that are financially successful, yet they are in a drought of ideas. There's nothing there. It's just a desert. They're not entertaining and they're too safe. I had, I told the director to this film, Hollywood wouldn't make something like this, basically. You know, it, it, I mean, I can't even think of a potential example. Are there any films out there made by a big movie star or big movie director that ends up, talking about fetish content? No, not really. I mean, and I think we know of certain directors that would rather, rub feet than, talk about the fetish sites that people pay for them. But anyway, so I think that one of the greatest things that you can do is create something from the heart when you create anything at all. And one of the best things you can do is to make something that makes people think. And despite what the concept of this movie is about, I think it's good in the sense that it will make a person think. It will make you think, you know? So at the end of the day, like I said before, people want to be entertained and they want an escape. We don't always want or need something that needs to be a James Cameron clone. I know that I don't. I don't want to watch a James Cameron movie. I don't personally, I've never met anyone in real life that would want to watch a James Cameron movie. And I'm not making this just a shit on James Cameron. I'm just saying this is my point, you know. People love his films, but or so they say, right? You know, his films are so financially successful, yet I personally don't find them interesting. What I find interesting are things from the indie developers, from the little guy, you know? That's what I like. So, as of right now, in March 2026, as I record this, this film is available so far just on Relay, which is an app, or it's whatever. It's like a website too. But Mr. Wright, the director, informed me that Only Feet will soon be available on various streaming sites such as Tubi and Fossum. So if you're watching this, watch out for it. You know, and hopefully later in the future when it is released, maybe somebody will find this review and just let me know what you watched it on. I'm just curious how this will pan out in the future, honestly. So, once again, thank you, Walter Wright, for thinking of me and letting me watch your film before it gets the big release. I actually do hope to see more of your work in the future. I'm just curious whatever you would cook up next. So, I guess to give this film a rating, I would give it 2 slimes or probably 2 feet and 10 toes, right? 10 toes. All right, so that's the review. I hope you enjoyed it, and hopefully later on when this is available for major massive streaming release, whatever you want to call it, hopefully people will watch this, and I'm very curious what other people think about it. That's it. Bye.